Rome did not destroy Jerusalem in a single day. It destroyed it slowly, deliberately, and in full view of the world. In the year 71 CE, the streets of Rome filled with cheering crowds. Flowers were thrown, trumpets sounded, senators watched from marble steps. To most Romans, it was a day of celebration. Another victory, another enemy crushed. But marching through the city were not soldiers alone. Chained together were men, women, and children from Judea. Their clothes were torn. Their bodies were thin. Some limped. Some could barely stand. These were not warriors anymore. They were trophies, proof that Rome had not just defeated an army, but erased a people's resistance. Golden treasures followed them. Sacred objects taken from a destroyed temple. Items that had once been touched only by priests were now carried through foreign streets for entertainment. The message was clear to everyone watching. Rome had won, completely, but this parade was only the end of a story that began 1 year earlier, inside a city that had turned into a prison. In 70 CE, Jerusalem was crowded with pilgrims celebrating Passover. Families had traveled from far away. They came to pray. They came to remember freedom. Instead, they walked into a trap. Roman legions surrounded the city. No one was allowed to leave. Food stopped coming in. Hope disappeared first. Then order. Then humanity itself. Inside the walls, hunger did what swords could not. Outside the walls, crosses filled the land. Day after day, bodies were nailed in sight of the city, left there to rot as a warning. This was not rage. This was policy. When Jerusalem finally fell, Rome did not stop with destruction. It sorted the survivors. It sold children. It forced men into arenas. It scattered families across continents. And then it erased names, cities, and laws to make sure the people of Judea would never rise again. What happened here was not just a battle. It was punishment, and the effects of that punishment would last nearly 2,000 years. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. Jerusalem in the spring of 70 CE was not preparing for war. It was preparing for Passover. The city was full. Pilgrims had arrived from villages, towns, and distant lands. Families crowded narrow streets. Markets were busy. Prayers echoed from the Temple Mount. For many, this journey was the most important moment of their year. Passover was a time to remember freedom, survival, and deliverance from oppression. Very few understood how dangerous the moment truly was. Outside the city, the Roman army was already moving. For Roman legions advanced toward Jerusalem, led by General Titus. He was young, disciplined, and ruthless when needed. More than 48,000 trained soldiers marched with him. Engineers, cavalry, archers, and siege experts followed close behind. This was not an army rushing into battle. It was an army preparing to suffocate a city. The timing was no accident. Titus ordered the siege to begin just days before Passover. He knew Jerusalem would be overflowing with people. He knew food supplies would already be strained. He knew panic would spread faster in crowded streets. Every decision was calculated. When Roman soldiers appeared on the hills surrounding Jerusalem, shock moved through the city like a cold wind. The gates were closed. Guards were posted. Some people believed God would protect them. Others believed the city walls would hold, as they had before. But Jerusalem was already broken from within. Inside the walls, Jewish factions were fighting each other. Leaders argued over control, power, and strategy. Groups loyal to different commanders attacked one another. In their anger and fear, they destroyed their own food stores, believing it would force everyone to fight harder against Rome. Instead, they sealed their own fate. As Roman camps rose around the city, Escape became impossible. Anyone who tried to slip out was caught. Some were killed immediately. Others were captured and punished in ways meant to be seen from the walls. Soon, hunger arrived. At first, people rationed. Then they searched. Then they begged. Bread disappeared. Grain vanished. Water became precious. Families who had arrived for prayer now fought over scraps. Parents watched children grow weak. The sick died first. The Roman army waited. They did not rush the walls. They built roads. They raised towers. They constructed massive earth ramps, inch by inch closer to the defenses. Every movement was slow and visible. The message was clear. Resistance was useless. Inside Jerusalem, order collapsed. People accused one another of hoarding food. Suspected deserters were executed by their own defenders. Fear ruled the streets. No one trusted anyone. Hunger stripped away dignity. Rumors spread faster than truth. Outside the walls, crosses began to appear. Captured civilians were nailed up where the city could see them. Not hidden, not quick. The Romans wanted the defenders to watch. Every body hanging outside the walls was a warning. Every death was a message. Still, the city did not surrender. As weeks passed, starvation killed more people than Roman weapons. Desperation drove some to madness. Acts once unthinkable became reality. The city that had welcomed pilgrims now became a place of silence, broken only by crying and screams. By the time the Roman siege engines reached the outer walls, Jerusalem was no longer a city of worship. It was a prison filled with the dying. And the worst was still to come. When the Romans first surrounded Jerusalem, many inside the city believed the walls would save them. Jerusalem had strong defenses. It had survived sieges before. Some thought Rome would grow tired and leave. They did not understand how Rome fought wars. The Romans did not depend on speed alone. They depended on patience. Hunger was their strongest weapon. As days turned into weeks, food vanished completely. What little grain remained had already been destroyed during the internal fighting. Markets were empty. Storehouses were bare. Even the wealthy had nothing left to trade. Gold meant nothing when there was nothing to buy. People searched everywhere. They scraped floors for spilled grain. They pulled grass from cracks in stone. They boiled leather belts and sandals, hoping to soften them enough to swallow. Children cried until they no longer had the strength to cry. Parents looked away, ashamed that they could not help them. Hunger changed people. Neighbors turned against neighbors. Friends betrayed friends. Anyone suspected of hiding food was beaten or killed. Armed groups moved through homes, tearing them apart in search of scraps. Mercy disappeared. Fear replaced faith. Those who tried to escape the city faced death either way. If caught by Jewish defenders, they were accused of desertion and executed. If caught by Romans, their fate was worse. Roman soldiers punished escape attempts publicly. Captives were scourged, tortured, and crucified where the city could see them. The crosses multiplied. At times, hundreds were raised in a single day. Bodies lined the hills outside Jerusalem. Some were nailed upright. Some were hung in twisted positions. The Romans experimented, turning execution into cruelty for its own sake. Soldiers laughed. They treated suffering as entertainment. Inside the city, the sight broke people. Every sunrise revealed new bodies. Every sunset ended with more screams. The smell of death drifted over the walls. Still, the fighting inside continued. Leaders refused to surrender. Pride mattered more than survival. Josephus, who witnessed these events, later described scenes that were almost impossible to believe. People collapsing in the streets. Corpses left unburied because no one had the strength to move them. Entire houses filled with the dead. Hunger erased all limits. One story spread through the city and froze those who heard it. A woman, driven beyond reason by starvation, killed her own infant and ate the body. When soldiers discovered what she had done, even they were horrified. But horror changed nothing. The siege continued. The Romans watched carefully. They knew Jerusalem was destroying itself. Every day of waiting weakened the city further. There was no need to rush. Time was on Rome's side. By midsummer, Jerusalem was no longer resisting out of strength. It was resisting out of despair. The people inside were ghosts. Their bodies moved, but their spirits were broken. Hunger had done what swords could not. It had crushed hope. When Roman forces finally prepared for the final assault, they were not facing a strong city. They were facing a population already dying. And what came next would erase Jerusalem forever. By late summer of 70 CE, Jerusalem was barely alive. The Roman siege towers now stood close to the walls. Earth ramps reached the fortifications. Roman soldiers could see directly into the city they had been starving for months. What they saw were not defenders ready to fight, but shadows moving among ruins. When the outer defenses finally collapsed, Roman troops poured in with discipline and anger. They had lost men during the long siege. They had waited in the heat, watching resistance continue when surrender would have saved lives. Now they advanced street by street. Fighting erupted everywhere. Jewish defenders, weak from hunger but driven by desperation, fought fiercely. They knew there would be no mercy. Every alley became a battlefield. Every doorway became a last stand. But hunger had stolen their strength. Roman armor, training, and numbers overwhelmed them. The Romans pushed steadily toward the Temple Mount. The temple was not just a building. It was the heart of Jewish life. It represented identity, faith, and survival. Many believed it could not fall. Some believed God would intervene at the last moment. No intervention came. As Roman soldiers breached the Antonia fortress overlooking the temple, chaos spread. Fires broke out. Smoke filled the air. Screams echoed across the sacred grounds. Defenders rushed forward, not to win, but to protect what they could. Then the fire reached the temple. Flames climbed the walls. Gold decorations melted and ran into cracks between stones. Smoke rose high above the city, visible for miles. People threw themselves into the fire trying to save holy objects. Roman soldiers killed without hesitation. There is no clear record of who started the fire. Some sources claim it was an accident. Others say it was deliberate. What is certain is that no one stopped it. The Second Temple burned. With it went centuries of worship, ritual, and history. The heart of Jerusalem was destroyed in a single night. After the temple fell, nothing restrained the Romans. They burned homes. They collapsed buildings. Entire neighborhoods were leveled. Anyone found alive was either killed or captured. The city became a field of ruins. By September, Jerusalem no longer existed as a functioning city. Only a few structures were left standing. 3 towers from Herod's palace remained, not as mercy, but as evidence. They were preserved to show future generations how powerful the city once was, and how completely Rome had crushed it. The streets were silent. Corpses lay uncounted. Survivors hid among rubble. Smoke still rose from burned ground. The city that had welcomed pilgrims weeks earlier was now empty. The Romans had achieved total victory, but destruction was only the beginning. For those who survived, a new ordeal awaited. Rome did not simply kill its enemies, processed them, sorted them. It decided who would live, who would suffer, and how their suffering would be used. The fall of Jerusalem marked the end of resistance. What followed was punishment on an industrial scale. When the fighting ended, The Romans did not see survivors as people. They saw them as resources. Roman officers moved through the ruins of Jerusalem and began a careful sorting process. Those who were armed were executed. The elderly and the sick were killed where they stood. There was no trial. There was no mercy. Survival depended on age, strength, and usefulness. Tens of thousands remained. These survivors were gathered into groups, guarded by soldiers, and counted. Families were separated without hesitation. Parents were torn from children. Husbands lost wives. Screams filled the air, but no one listened. Age decided fate. Children under 17 were taken first. They were marked for sale. Many were sent to slave markets across the empire. Some were taken to Rome. Others were shipped to Egypt, North Africa, or distant provinces. Most would never see their families again. Their names would be erased. Their past would mean nothing. Strong men faced a different future. Many were selected for forced labor. They were sent to quarries, mines, and construction sites. Their bodies were worked until they broke. Others were sent to arenas, where survival was part of the entertainment. These men were not given quick deaths. They were trained as gladiators or thrown unarmed before wild animals. Crowds cheered as they died. Their suffering reminded Roman audiences what happened to those who challenged imperial power. Some executions were staged as plays. Prisoners were dressed as heroes from myths and forced to reenact famous deaths. They were burned, torn apart, or killed on command. The crowd watched. The message was clear. Rebellion ended in humiliation. Ironically, many Jewish captives were used to build monuments celebrating their own defeat. Forced laborers worked on the Forum of Peace in Rome. Others helped construct the great amphitheater later known as the Colosseum. They built the places where their people would die. Meanwhile, rebel leaders were handled differently. Simon Bar Giora was paraded through Rome in chains during the triumph of 71 CE. Roman citizens cheered as he passed. After the celebration ended, he was taken to prison and executed. John of Giscala was spared death, but not suffering. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. He lived as a warning, not a man. The rest of the population was scattered. Ships carried captives from the ports of Judea to every corner of the empire. Archaeological evidence confirms their presence far from home. Tombstones, records, and casual references reveal how completely they were absorbed into Roman society as property. They became servants, laborers, and entertainers. Their identity survived only in memory and prayer. By destroying Jerusalem, Rome had not only crushed a city, it had dismantled a people. And Rome was not finished yet. Rome had destroyed Jerusalem, but destruction alone was not enough. The Roman leadership understood something important. Cities could be rebuilt. Populations could return. Memories could inspire rebellion again. If Judea was ever to be controlled permanently, its people had to be removed not just physically but symbolically. Years passed, but resistance did not disappear. Small revolts continued across the region. The idea of Jerusalem as a holy center remained alive in Jewish memory. As long as the city existed as a Jewish place, Rome believed it would remain dangerous. So the empire chose a final solution. Emperor Hadrian decided Jerusalem would never belong to the Jews again. The ruined city was rebuilt, but not as Jerusalem. It was renamed Aelia Capitolina, a Roman colony in both design and identity. Wide stone streets replaced narrow paths. Roman statues filled public spaces. Pagan temples rose where Jewish homes once stood. The most painful decision came at the Temple Mount. Where the Jewish temple had stood, Hadrian ordered a temple built to Jupiter, the chief Roman god. This was not done for convenience. It was done to humiliate. The holiest place in Judaism was deliberately turned into a symbol of Roman religion and dominance. Then came the law. Jews were banned from entering the city. This was not a temporary military order. It was permanent. Jews could not live in Jerusalem. They could not visit. They could not pray there. Roman guards enforced the rule strictly. Any violation was treated as a crime. Only one exception was allowed. Once each year, on the anniversary of the temple's destruction, Jews were permitted to enter the city to mourn. They were allowed to walk among the ruins, weep, and leave. Roman authorities believed this controlled suffering reinforced defeat. Grief was permitted, but hope was not. Historical accounts describe elderly pilgrims arriving in rags, crying openly as they looked at what remained of their city. They were surrounded by a Roman world built on their loss. Rome also erased the land's name. The province of Judea was renamed Syria Palaestina. The name was chosen deliberately, referencing ancient enemies of the Jews. This was symbolic violence. It removed Jewish identity from maps, documents, and memory. Rome was not simply ruling the land. It was rewriting it. This ban lasted for centuries. Even after the Roman Empire adopted Christianity, Jewish exclusion remained. Generations lived and died without seeing their holy city. For the first time in their history, Jews became a people without a homeland. They settled wherever survival was possible. Spain, North Africa, Italy, Babylonia, Arabia. Each community adapted, but none forgot. Jerusalem remained present in prayers, stories, and rituals. Without the temple, Jewish life changed. Worship shifted from sacrifice to study, from pilgrimage to community. Religious leaders became teachers instead of priests. What emerged was a new form of Judaism, built for survival without land, walls, or power. Rome had succeeded in exile, but something unexpected happened. Jewish identity did not disappear. It hardened. It adapted. It endured. By the time Jerusalem had been rebuilt as a Roman colony and Jews were banned from their own city, the survivors were scattered across the known world. Families had been torn apart, homes burned, and communities erased. Yet, despite this unimaginable loss, something remarkable happened. The people refused to vanish. The diaspora spread Jewish survivors across continents. Children who had been enslaved in faraway lands grew up without knowing their families. Yet they carried stories, prayers, and traditions with them. Men and women who had labored on Roman monuments whispered names of their lost city to their children. Each fragment of memory became a seed for survival. Life in exile was harsh. In Egypt, North Africa, Spain, and Babylonia, Jews lived as outsiders. They faced discrimination, forced labor, and constant reminders that their homeland was no longer theirs. Yet they built new communities, synagogues, and schools. Religion became a unifying force. Without the temple, rituals of prayer and study took center stage, creating a new form of Jewish life that could survive anywhere. The memory of Jerusalem burned brightly. Every family that had fled or been enslaved carried the pain of what had been lost. Stories of the temple, the city walls, and the streets full of pilgrims were passed down from generation to generation. This collective memory became a thread connecting distant communities. Even thousands of miles away, the heart of Judea remained alive in the minds of its people. The Romans had intended to erase not just a city, but a culture. Yet identity proved stronger than walls, swords, and laws. Despite centuries of forced exile, the Jews kept their faith, language, and traditions intact. They adapted to survive, but they never forgot. Over time, the dispersed communities formed networks. Trade, correspondence, and religious scholarship linked far-flung Jews together. This diaspora existence would define the people for nearly 2,000 years. shaping a culture resilient enough to withstand empire after empire. The catastrophe of 70 CE became not only a story of loss but a story of endurance. Even the destruction of the temple could not destroy belief. Prayer, study, and memory became new ways of keeping Jerusalem alive. Festivals, rituals, and annual pilgrimages on the day of the temple's destruction reminded the exiled that they were still one people. The city itself had fallen, but its spirit had not. Rome had succeeded in crushing a city. It had failed to crush a people. The enslaved, the scattered, and the mourning carried on, rebuilding their lives wherever they were forced to live. They transformed pain into perseverance, loss into identity, and exile into history. 2,000 years later, the story of Jerusalem, the temple, and the Jewish people's survival continues to echo. The triumphs of Rome are remembered, but so is the endurance of those who refuse to be forgotten. History shows that empires can destroy cities, they can enslave populations, they can erase names from maps, but they cannot erase the memory, the faith, or the will of a determined people. Even in the ashes of Jerusalem, life found a way to survive. And from that survival, a legacy was born that no conqueror could ever extinguish.